The first sound anyone heard that morning was not a newborn gorilla's cry, but the deep, warning rumble of a silverback who refused to take a single step closer to his own baby. Inside the primate habitat at Redwood Wildlife Center just outside Portland, Oregon, every routine unfolded exactly as it had dozens of times before. The veterinary team watched from the observation room. The keepers quietly documented every movement, and the young mother rested while gently cradling the tiny infant against her chest. By every medical measure, the birth had gone smoothly. The baby was breathing normally. Its heartbeat was strong. Its tiny fingers flexed against its mother's fur. Yet something in the enclosure felt unmistakably wrong. Titan, the massive silverback who had always been the calm protector of his family, stood nearly 20 feet away without moving. He didn't beat his chest. He didn't display aggression. He didn't even glance toward the keepers behind the reinforced glass. His eyes remained locked on the newborn with an intensity that made everyone in the room stop talking. Olivia Brooks, the head keeper who had worked with Titan for almost 12 years, had never seen him behave this way. Normally, within minutes of a birth, Titan would carefully approach, inspect the infant with remarkable gentleness, and settle beside the family, as if silently introducing the newest member of the troop. Instead, he slowly backed away each time the mother shifted closer. Not once did he attempt to touch the baby. Not once did he reach out with a hand. Even stranger, whenever the infant let out a soft cry, Titan's entire body stiffened, but he still refused to move any closer. Mason Reed, one of the younger keepers, whispered that perhaps Titan simply hadn't accepted the newborn yet. Another staff member quietly suggested the silverback might be under stress. Dr. Lucas Bennett wasn't convinced. Through years of treating great apes, he had learned that unusual behavior often appeared long before medical equipment revealed anything was wrong. Still, every monitor showed reassuring numbers, and there was no obvious reason for concern. Hours passed. Visitors gathered outside the habitat, unaware that something extraordinary was unfolding behind the scenes. Titan remained alert without eating, drinking, or resting. Whenever another gorilla wandered too close to the infant, he immediately stepped between them, not with anger, but with quiet determination. Curiously, he never approached the baby himself. It was as though an invisible line surrounded the newborn. One Titan refused to cross, while making absolutely certain no one else crossed it carelessly either. Olivia felt a chill she couldn't explain. This wasn't rejection. It wasn't fear. It looked more like impossible restraint. As evening settled over the zoo, Dr. Bennett ordered one more precautionary examination before ending the day, mostly to reassure everyone that the infant was perfectly healthy. Titan watched every movement without blinking. Then, just as the portable ultrasound machine was wheeled into the nursery suite, the giant silverback suddenly let out a single low rumble that echoed through the building, lowered his head, and slowly turned his back to his own child, as if he already knew something no human in the room had even begun to suspect. Titan had never been the loudest silverback in the troop, but everyone at Redwood Wildlife Center knew when he entered a space because the entire family relaxed around him. Younger gorillas climbed across his shoulders without hesitation. Nervous mothers settled more quickly whenever he was nearby, and even during routine veterinary visits, he displayed a patience that surprised new staff members. Olivia often joked that Titan acted more like an experienced guardian than the dominant male of the group. Over the years, she had watched him gently return curious infants to their mothers after they wandered too far, quietly sit beside frightened juveniles during thunderstorms, and wait until every other gorilla had eaten before touching his own meal. That was why his behavior now felt impossible to explain. There was no anger in his face, no panic in his movements, and no sign that he wanted to abandon his family. If anything, he seemed more devoted than ever. Every few minutes, he slowly circled the edge of the habitat, never allowing his attention to drift from the newborn for even a second. When visitors pressed against the viewing glass, Titan calmly positioned himself between them and the family. When another adult gorilla casually wandered closer, he gently redirected it with nothing more than a quiet stare. Yet the one thing he would not do was close the final few feet separating him from his own child. The distance remained exactly the same, almost as though he had drawn an invisible boundary that only he could see. Olivia reviewed years of behavioral records that evening. searching for anything remotely similar. She found notes describing Titan comforting injured troop members, sharing food during difficult winters, and even remaining beside an elderly female through an entire night after she became ill. There was nothing suggesting fear of infants or rejection of offspring. Dr. Lucas Bennett studied the security footage from different camera angles, slowing each recording frame by frame. The more he watched, the stranger Titan's actions became. Every time Nova shifted slightly, Titan's eyes followed the movement instantly. Every tiny breath, every stretch of a finger, every soft sound drew his complete attention. It was not the behavior of a father who had emotionally withdrawn. It looked painfully close to the behavior of someone desperately trying not to make a mistake. Mason quietly asked whether the stress of becoming a father had simply overwhelmed the silverback. Olivia shook her head before he even finished speaking. She had seen frightened gorillas before. She had seen protective gorillas, grieving gorillas, confused gorillas, and lonely gorillas. This was different. Titan carried himself with heartbreaking certainty, as if every instinct inside him demanded that he move closer, while another instinct warned him that doing so would bring consequences he could not risk. Late that night, the public had long gone home, leaving the habitat wrapped in silence except for the gentle hum of climate controls and the occasional rustle of bedding. Nova slept peacefully beside the exhausted mother, while Titan remained awake in the shadows, still refusing to rest. Olivia watched through the observation window until nearly midnight before noticing something so subtle she almost believed she had imagined it. Without taking a single step forward, Titan slowly lifted one trembling hand toward the sleeping infant, stopping just inches short of empty air before quietly lowering it again. And at that exact moment, the heart rate monitor attached to the portable ultrasound cart emitted one unexpected, single warning beep. The unexpected warning beep from the ultrasound cart was quickly dismissed as a loose sensor, yet it marked the beginning of a day that unsettled everyone inside Redwood Wildlife Center. By sunrise, Titan had developed a pattern no one could explain. Instead of remaining beside the troop as he always had, he quietly walked the perimeter of the habitat in slow, deliberate circles, pausing at 4 specific locations before returning to the exact place where he could see Nova without standing close enough to touch her. He repeated the same route again and again with astonishing precision, never missing a single stop, as though he were measuring invisible boundaries only he understood. Olivia watched for nearly an hour before realizing the path never changed by more than a few inches. Mason tried placing fresh fruit along Titan's route, hoping to interrupt the behavior, but the silverback calmly stepped over every piece without even glancing down. What troubled the staff even more was what happened whenever Nova stretched in her sleep. Titan instantly froze wherever he happened to be, slowly turned toward the infant, and remained perfectly motionless until she settled again. It was not fear. It was anticipation. It looked as though he was waiting for something that never came. Visitors noticed the unusual silence in the habitat. The troop was behaving normally, grooming one another and exploring their enclosure. Yet Titan's strange routine drew every eye. Children asked why the father would not meet his baby. Parents quietly wondered if something was wrong with the newborn. The keepers offered reassuring smiles, but privately their confidence was beginning to fade. Dr. Lucas Bennett ordered another complete physical examination from outside the enclosure using every non-invasive tool available. Nova's breathing remained steady. Her temperature was normal. Her heart rhythm showed nothing alarming. Every report ended with the same conclusion. Healthy infant, healthy mother, healthy environment. Nothing explained the silverback's impossible restraint. As afternoon sunlight shifted across the habitat, another unusual behavior emerged. Every time the mother adjusted Nova into a different position, Titan searched the ground nearby until he found a handful of soft leaves or fresh straw. Instead of carrying the material toward the family, he carefully placed it several feet away in neat little piles before stepping back again. He never attempted to build a nest. He never offered the bedding to the mother. He simply arranged the small cushions in silence, then stared at them as though comparing distances in his mind. Olivia had worked with gorillas for more than 2 decades, and she had never witnessed anything remotely similar. The behavior was too organized to be random and too purposeful to ignore. By evening, concern had spread beyond the animal care team. Zoo administrators quietly discussed whether Titan's unpredictable actions posed a future risk to the troop. Mason admitted that the silverback's behavior no longer seemed merely unusual. It felt calculated in a way he could not understand. Still, no one wanted to intervene without evidence. Just before the habitat closed for the night, the youngest female in the troop wandered innocently toward one of the small bedding piles Titan had arranged. Without making a sound or showing the slightest hint of aggression, Titan hurried over, gently picked up every single leaf he had collected, carried them to the shallow stream running through the enclosure, and carefully released them into the water one by one, watching each leaf drift away until none remained, before slowly turning back toward Nova with an expression that left every keeper wondering whether he had just abandoned a plan that only he could see. By the following morning, concern had quietly turned into disagreement. The keepers no longer questioned whether Titan's behavior was unusual. They questioned what it meant. Olivia insisted that every action she had witnessed pointed toward intention rather than instability, but the zoo's administrative staff saw something entirely different. They reviewed hours of security footage showing a father who refused to acknowledge his own newborn, ignored food, followed rigid routines, and repeatedly interrupted the troop's normal social behavior. To them, the pattern suggested emotional detachment that could eventually affect the entire family. Nobody accused Titan of being aggressive. In fact, that was exactly what made the situation so confusing. He never threatened anyone. He never challenged the keepers. He simply acted as though an invisible rule existed that no one else could understand. During the morning staff meeting, several senior managers expressed concern that Nova's earliest days were passing without the normal bonding that young gorillas depended upon. One specialist warned that if the distance continued, the infant could lose valuable opportunities for healthy family interaction. Another suggested that Titan's unusual behavior might unintentionally teach the rest of the troop to avoid the newborn as well. Dr. Lucas Bennett remained cautious. He admitted that every medical examination still showed encouraging results, but he could not explain why the silverback's instincts contradicted every clinical finding. The uncertainty itself was becoming the problem. Outside, Titan continued his silent routine, carefully positioning himself wherever he could watch Nova from a distance while gently redirecting curious troop members without force. To Olivia, those actions looked protective. To others, they looked obsessive. Mason found himself caught between both opinions. He had admired Titan for years, yet even he struggled to understand why the silverback repeatedly chose separation over connection. Throughout the afternoon, visitors noticed the unusual atmosphere inside the habitat. Instead of the joyful scenes that often followed a birth, the family remained strangely divided by a space no one dared cross. Questions filled the observation deck. Was the father rejecting the baby? Had something gone wrong? During the birth? Was the newborn weaker than the zoo admitted? The rumors spread faster than facts, and before long several local news outlets began requesting official statements. Pressure mounted on the administration to demonstrate that the situation was under control. Olivia spent nearly an hour beside the observation glass, speaking softly to Titan, hoping he might respond to the familiar sound of her voice. He acknowledged her presence with a brief glance, then immediately returned his attention to Nova without taking a single step forward. That tiny moment broke Olivia's heart. She realized Titan was not ignoring the family. He was choosing distance, and whatever reason existed seemed powerful enough to overcome every natural instinct he possessed. Late that afternoon, the zoo director arrived with a written recommendation prepared by the Behavioral Review Committee. Until the veterinary team could identify the cause of Titan's increasingly unusual conduct, they believed it would be safer to temporarily relocate him to an adjacent habitat where visual contact with the troop could continue while eliminating any possibility that his unpredictable behavior might influence the newborn's development. Olivia immediately objected, warning that separating Titan without understanding his motivation could make everything worse. Her protest was politely acknowledged but ultimately overruled. As the maintenance crew quietly rolled the transfer gates into position and radioed that the isolation enclosure was ready, Titan slowly stood up, looked directly toward the heavy steel doors for the very first time, and took one deliberate step backward as though he somehow understood exactly what the humans were about to do. The transfer was scheduled for sunrise the next morning, giving the veterinary staff one final evening to complete routine observations before the enclosure would be divided. Although the decision had already been approved, Olivia could not shake the feeling that everyone had reached a conclusion before asking the right questions. She stayed long after the rest of the visitors had left, quietly recording Titan's movements while the habitat settled into its familiar nighttime rhythm. The silverback never resisted the keepers, never challenged the barriers, and never attempted to approach Nova. Instead, he continued his strange pattern with almost unbelievable consistency. Every time the infant shifted into a different sleeping position, Titan silently changed where he stood as well. At first, Olivia assumed it was coincidence, but after nearly an hour, she noticed something impossible to ignore. Titan was not reacting to where Nova was. He was reacting to the direction her tiny chest was facing. Whenever the newborn rolled slightly onto one side, Titan calmly repositioned himself until he stood directly opposite that angle. If Nova's body turned a few inches, Titan adjusted by the same amount. It looked less like pacing and more like careful alignment. Curious, Olivia retrieved an old habitat blueprint stored in the observation office. She marked every location where Titan had stopped during the past 24 hours and compared those points with the infant's position each time. The pattern startled her. The lines formed a nearly perfect arc around Nova rather than random circles through the enclosure. Mason joined her, studying the sketch in silence. Neither of them could explain why a gorilla would repeatedly calculate distance with such precision. Dr. Lucas Bennett initially believed the pattern might simply reflect habitual movement, but when Olivia overlaid another day's observations, the same geometry appeared again with only minor variations. Titan was changing his own location every time Nova's body orientation changed, yet he never shortened the distance between them. It was as though he had selected the safest possible position according to a rule invisible to everyone else. Lucas frowned. Behavioral instincts often contain biological information humans failed to recognize immediately. He began reviewing every medical image taken since Nova's birth, enlarging each frame while comparing timestamps with Olivia's chart. Nothing obvious appeared. The infant still looked healthy, and every recorded vital sign remained reassuring. Yet one detail quietly bothered him. During each previous ultrasound, Nova had naturally shifted position before the examination was complete, forcing the technician to adjust the probe repeatedly. At the time, nobody considered that unusual for a newborn. Now Lucas wondered whether those movements had prevented anyone from studying the same area long enough. Before leaving for the night, Olivia returned to the observation window one last time. Titan had settled into complete stillness, his attention fixed not on Nova's face, nor on the mother beside her, but on one remarkably specific point beneath the baby's left shoulder. The focus was so exact that Olivia instinctively looked there herself, seeing nothing at all. She slowly turned toward Lucas without taking her eyes off the habitat. Neither of them spoke for several seconds before Lucas quietly closed the transfer paperwork, set it aside on the desk, and instructed the overnight medical team to prepare the ultrasound equipment again because, before anyone moved Titan into isolation, he intended to perform one far more detailed examination than any they had completed before. The overnight examination began before sunrise while the habitat remained quiet, and the transfer team waited outside with the isolation gates still locked in place. Because Nova appeared calm, Dr. Lucas Bennett decided to perform the scan without changing her natural position. Instead of following the standard procedure, he instructed the technician to keep the probe completely still while slowly rotating the imaging angle beneath the baby's left shoulder, exactly where Olivia had noticed Titan focusing his attention. For nearly a minute, the monitor displayed nothing unusual. Soft tissue appeared normal. Heart rhythm remained steady. Even Lucas began wondering whether exhaustion had led them down the wrong path. Then the technician adjusted the angle by less than half an inch. The room instantly fell silent. A narrow, translucent membrane that had blended almost perfectly with the surrounding tissue suddenly became visible on the screen. It formed a tiny pocket beside Nova's heart, shifting almost imperceptibly with every breath. Lucas immediately asked the technician to freeze the image. He enlarged it once. Then, again, the membrane expanded and contracted depending entirely on the baby's position. Whenever Nova rolled naturally onto one side, the delicate pocket relaxed. But when the infant was lifted or gently pressed against another body, the membrane folded inward, placing unexpected pressure against the heart. It was an extraordinarily uncommon condition, subtle enough to disappear during a routine examination if the viewing angle changed even slightly. Lucas quietly repeated the scan 3 more times before reaching the same conclusion. The newborn had never been in immediate danger, simply lying beside her mother. The real risk appeared during close physical contact or firm handling before the condition could stabilize or receive treatment. Every instinctive embrace from a powerful adult gorilla, no matter how loving or gentle, could create exactly the kind of pressure the membrane could not yet tolerate. Olivia slowly turned toward the habitat, unable to speak. Through the observation window, Titan had not moved. He remained standing at precisely the same distance he had maintained since the birth, watching with unwavering patience. Suddenly, every unexplained action fit together with painful clarity. He had never rejected Nova. He had prevented himself from doing the one thing every father naturally wanted to do. The invisible boundary he refused to cross had never protected him. It had protected his child. His careful repositioning around the enclosure had followed Nova's changing posture because he instinctively recognized which positions allowed her breathing to remain easiest. The small bedding piles he had arranged were never nests waiting to be used. They marked places where he seemed prepared to support the mother if she shifted the infant too abruptly. Even releasing the leaves into the stream now carried a heartbreaking meaning. The moment he realized humans planned to separate him, he had abandoned every preparation he had made because none of it would matter if he could no longer watch over Nova himself. Lucas lowered the ultrasound probe with trembling hands. The transfer authorization still rested on the nearby desk, waiting for his signature. Without saying a word, he picked up the document, tore it neatly down the center, and placed both halves into the medical waste bin. Around him, nobody spoke. Olivia covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Mason stared through the glass toward Titan, remembering every moment he had mistaken devotion for indifference. On the other side of the enclosure, the great silverback quietly remained where he had always chosen to stand, carrying the burden of a father's impossible restraint while every human around him had spent 2 days believing he simply did not love his own child. For several long minutes, nobody inside the veterinary suite moved. The silence carried far more weight than any apology could have. Olivia slowly replayed the past 2 days in her mind, and every memory changed meaning. She remembered Titan stepping over untouched fruit, not because he had lost interest in eating, but because he refused to look away from Nova for even a moment. She remembered the carefully measured circles around the habitat that everyone had called obsessive, only now realizing they had been silent calculations made by a father trying to protect a child he could not explain to anyone. Even the small piles of leaves that had puzzled the keepers no longer seemed strange. They were quiet preparations from someone who had been searching for the safest possible way to support his newborn without risking the slightest pressure against her fragile body. Mason felt a knot tighten in his chest as he remembered suggesting that Titan was emotionally detached. He walked to the observation window and rested his hand against the glass, embarrassed by how confidently he had judged behavior he had never truly understood. On the other side, Titan remained exactly where he had always stood, still carrying the burden alone because no one had ever shown him they finally understood. Dr. Lucas Bennett quietly gathered every report that had labeled Titan's behavior abnormal and placed them into a separate folder. He drew a single line across the front page and wrote 2 simple words in large letters. Protective response. No one argued. The entire medical team knew those documents had recorded the limits of human observation rather than the limits of the silverback's instincts. Olivia requested that every scheduled change inside the habitat be postponed. There would be no transfer, no separation, and no attempts to encourage physical bonding until Nova's condition could be safely managed. For the first time since the birth, every decision inside the building centered around preserving the trust Titan had been trying so desperately to maintain. Throughout the afternoon, the atmosphere inside the habitat changed in subtle but meaningful ways. Instead of urging Titan closer, the keepers adjusted their own routines around him. Food was placed where he naturally preferred to stand. Medical observations were performed quietly, without interrupting his chosen position. Even the visitors were redirected farther from the glass to reduce unnecessary noise. None of those changes had been requested by Titan, yet each one acknowledged that he had understood something before any human had. As evening approached, Olivia carried a lightweight blanket into the observation area, intending to leave it available if the mother chose to use it later. Before setting it down, she paused. She suddenly realized she was about to place it exactly where Titan had repeatedly arranged his small bedding piles. The coincidence sent a chill through her. Without thinking, she carefully laid the blanket in the same location he had selected over and over again. Minutes later, the mother slowly shifted Nova onto the soft surface without any prompting, allowing the infant to rest comfortably while remaining completely undisturbed. Titan watched the adjustment in complete silence. For the first time since the birth, the tension in his shoulders eased ever so slightly. It was almost impossible to notice unless someone had spent hours watching him, but Olivia saw it immediately. She did not celebrate. She simply smiled through tear-filled eyes, grateful that the exhausted father no longer had to carry every responsibility completely alone. Standing beside her, Lucas quietly authorized a specialized treatment plan for Nova and instructed the entire veterinary team that from this moment forward, every medical decision would begin with one simple principle. Before questioning what Titan was doing, they would first ask what he was trying to protect. Over the next several days, Redwood Wildlife Center quietly transformed around a lesson no textbook had ever taught. Instead of trying to change Titan's behavior, the staff began changing their own. Dr. Lucas Bennett redesigned Nova's monitoring schedule so every examination could be completed while the infant rested naturally beside her mother, eliminating unnecessary repositioning. Olivia reorganized the habitat with remarkable care, removing obstacles that might require the troop to crowd together and creating gentle pathways that allowed everyone to move comfortably without placing pressure on the newborn. Mason installed several low observation platforms outside the enclosure, giving the veterinary team clearer views so they no longer needed to enter the habitat as often. Each adjustment was small on its own, yet together they created something far more important than convenience. They created trust. Titan noticed the difference almost immediately. The constant interruptions disappeared. The unfamiliar equipment stopped appearing without warning. The keepers no longer tried to encourage him toward Nova or tempt him with treats. They simply respected the quiet decisions he had been making since the very beginning. For the first time in days, the enormous silverback chose to sit rather than stand. He remained at his familiar distance, but the rigid tension that had held every muscle in his body slowly began to fade. Olivia smiled as she watched him settle beneath the large cedar log near the center of the habitat, a place he had completely ignored since Nova was born. It was a simple choice, but to everyone who knew him, it meant something extraordinary. He finally believed the humans were no longer working against the instincts he had trusted all along. As Nova continued improving under careful medical supervision, Lucas developed a special support cushion that allowed the infant to rest without placing unnecessary pressure on the delicate area identified during the examination. Rather than introducing it, suddenly, the team quietly placed the cushion in the exact location Titan had repeatedly marked with his mysterious bedding piles. No one guided the mother toward it. No one intervened. Within minutes, she calmly carried Nova onto the soft support exactly as Titan's earlier preparations had seemed to anticipate. The silverback watched the movement without shifting from his place. He lowered his head for a brief moment, then looked back toward his family with a calm expression Olivia had not seen since before the birth. It was not excitement. It was relief. Later that afternoon, a gentle rain began falling across the zoo, sending most visitors indoors. Inside the habitat, the troop gathered naturally beneath the covered shelter. There was no panic, no confusion, and no unusual movement. For the first time since Nova entered the world, the family simply existed together in peaceful silence. Titan remained nearby, neither withdrawing nor forcing himself closer than instinct allowed. The invisible burden he had carried alone no longer belonged only to him. The humans finally understood it as well. As Olivia prepared to leave for the evening, she glanced back through the observation window one final time. Titan slowly closed his eyes for the first uninterrupted rest anyone had seen him take since Nova's birth, while only a few feet away the newborn slept comfortably, protected not only by a father's extraordinary instincts, but also by the people who had finally learned to trust them. Several months later, the story that quietly reshaped Redwood Wildlife Center was never displayed on a billboard or announced during public presentations. Visitors came to admire the gorillas without realizing they were witnessing the result of one father's extraordinary patience. Nova continued growing stronger with regular monitoring, and each examination confirmed that the delicate condition had steadily improved exactly as the specialists had hoped. There was no dramatic celebration when the day finally arrived. No cameras surrounded the habitat. No speeches were given. It happened on an ordinary autumn morning while sunlight filtered through the tall cedar trees and the troop settled into another peaceful day. Olivia stood in the observation room beside Dr. Lucas Bennett as they reviewed Nova's latest results. For the first time since the birth, Lucas quietly closed the medical file, smiled, and said there were no longer any restrictions preventing normal family interaction. Neither of them hurried outside. Neither of them tried to guide what happened next. They simply watched. Inside the habitat, Nova toddled carefully across the grass with the uncertain balance that only a young gorilla could have. The little one paused halfway between the mother and Titan, looked around curiously, then took another tiny step forward without anyone encouraging it. Titan remained completely still. The great silverback did not rush forward or reach out with excitement. He waited. He had spent so many days choosing patience over instinct that patience itself had become another expression of love. Nova stopped only inches away and tilted the tiny head upward. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with almost unbelievable gentleness, Titan lowered one enormous hand until a single fingertip rested softly against Nova's tiny fingers. It lasted only a second before he slowly withdrew again, giving the youngster complete freedom to choose the next move. Nova answered by happily placing one small hand back onto her father's finger before wandering off to explore another corner of the habitat, as though nothing remarkable had happened at all. Olivia felt tears gather again, not because the moment was dramatic, but because it was so wonderfully ordinary. Lucas quietly removed the final note marked protective observation from Nova's medical chart. Instead of filing it away, he placed it inside the staff training manual. New veterinarians, interns, and keepers would study the case for years to come, not as an example of an unusual illness, but as a reminder that careful observation sometimes begins by respecting what an animal is trying to communicate before searching for what it cannot say. Mason later replaced the temporary sign outside the habitat with a permanent plaque that read, "The greatest protectors are not always the ones who move first. Sometimes, they are the ones who know when not to." Every keeper who passed it slowed down for a moment, remembering how close they had come to separating a father from the family he had never stopped protecting. As evening settled over the zoo once again, Titan rested peacefully beneath the same cedar tree while Nova played nearby, no longer separated by fear, misunderstanding, or silent sacrifice. The distance that once looked like rejection had become the clearest proof of love anyone there had ever witnessed. Sometimes the deepest love is measured not by the touch we give, but by the touch we are willing to withhold until it is truly safe.